In some movies, war arrives like thunder. In others, it lingers like an old wound that never truly healed. The jungle in Rambo, First Blood Part 2 does not simply hide soldiers, rivers, and enemy camps. It hides unfinished promises. It hides memories governments would rather forget. It hides a question that haunted an entire generation. What happens when a nation leaves part of itself behind? Long before the first explosion tears through the trees, the film creates the feeling that something abandoned is waiting in the shadows, hoping someone will finally come back. Released in 1985, Rambo, First Blood Part 2 emerged during a fascinating period in Hollywood history. The American film industry was becoming increasingly comfortable with large-scale action spectacles, yet audiences still carried emotional memories of the Vietnam War. The film arrived at the intersection of entertainment, politics, psychology, and business. It was not merely an action movie. It was a carefully engineered cinematic product designed to transform national uncertainty into heroic certainty. Behind every explosion stood investors, studio executives, marketers, technicians, and filmmakers attempting to convert emotional resonance into box office success. The project represented a substantial financial gamble. Produced with a budget estimated at around $25 million, the film required enormous resources compared to many action films of the previous decade. Investors were not simply funding another sequel. They were funding an attempt to elevate a troubled veteran into one of the most recognizable action heroes in cinema history. If audiences rejected the concept, the losses would be significant. If they embraced it, the rewards could extend far beyond ticket sales into merchandising, television rights, international distribution, and future franchise opportunities. From a business perspective, the film illustrates how Hollywood often behaves like a venture capital ecosystem. Studios invest capital into intellectual property, hoping to create scalable brands. The first film introduced audiences to John Rambo as a damaged veteran struggling to survive. The sequel faced a different challenge. It needed to expand the brand while preserving the emotional identity that made the character memorable. This is remarkably similar to a startup attempting to grow after its first successful product launch. Expand too little and growth stagnates. Expand too aggressively, and the original appeal disappears. At the center of the story stands a man who has already survived war, but has not escaped it psychologically. Rambo is approached with a mission connected to American prisoners potentially left behind in Vietnam. What begins as a reconnaissance assignment gradually reveals deeper questions about loyalty, duty, bureaucracy, and truth. The narrative framework appears simple on the surface, but beneath it lies a powerful emotional engine. Audiences are not merely watching a rescue mission. They are watching a wounded individual confront unresolved trauma while searching for meaning in a world that previously rejected him. The timing of the film was particularly important. During the mid-1980s, audiences increasingly sought cinematic experiences that combined spectacle with emotional reassurance. Economic optimism, technological advancement, and blockbuster filmmaking were reshaping entertainment markets. Studios recognized that audiences wanted heroes capable of overcoming impossible odds. John Rambo became an ideal candidate. He represented physical strength, personal resilience, and moral clarity. These characteristics translated into strong commercial potential because they appealed across multiple demographic groups and international markets. Technologically, the film reflects an era when practical filmmaking techniques remained dominant. Before digital visual effects transformed the industry, filmmakers relied heavily on physical stunts, pyrotechnics, location photography, mechanical effects, and meticulous coordination. Every explosion required planning. Every helicopter sequence involved real equipment. Every jungle chase demanded logistical precision. This reliance on practical craftsmanship created a sense of physical authenticity that audiences could immediately feel, even if they never consciously analyzed the production methods behind it. The jungle setting itself functions almost like a character. From a production standpoint, environments influence emotional psychology. Dense vegetation creates uncertainty. Limited visibility generates tension. Natural obstacles increase perceived risk. Filmmakers understand that audiences instinctively respond to environmental cues. The jungle becomes a visual representation of hidden truths, buried memories, and unresolved conflicts. Every tree, river, and shadow contributes to the emotional architecture of the film. One of the most interesting aspects of the movie is how it transforms individual struggle into collective wish fulfillment. Many viewers did not simply see Rambo as a fictional soldier. They saw him as a symbolic figure confronting questions that society itself had not fully answered. Whether one agrees with the film's perspective or not, its cultural power comes from its ability to translate abstract national emotions into concrete cinematic action. Instead of debating policy, the movie channels frustration, regret, and hope into a single character moving through a dangerous landscape. The screenplay demonstrates a keen understanding of audience psychology. Successful blockbusters often establish a clear objective early, create obstacles that appear overwhelming, and then place extraordinary pressure on the protagonist. These mechanisms increase emotional investment. Every challenge overcome creates a small psychological reward for viewers. Every setback generates anticipation. The film carefully balances these elements to maximize engagement while maintaining forward momentum. From an economic standpoint, star power played a crucial role in reducing investment risk. By 1985, Sylvester Stallone had already become one of Hollywood's most valuable commercial assets. Studios understood that recognizable performers function similarly to established corporate brands. Their presence reduces uncertainty and increases consumer confidence. Audiences purchasing tickets already possess expectations shaped by previous experiences. In financial terms, this lowers market entry friction and strengthens revenue forecasts. The film's marketing strategy also reflected growing sophistication within Hollywood. Promotional materials emphasized action, heroism, and spectacle. Trailers highlighted helicopters, explosions, weapons, and survival scenarios. Posters presented Rambo as an iconic figure rather than merely a character within a story. This distinction is important. Successful franchises do not simply sell plots. They sell identities, symbols, and emotional experiences. Marketing transformed Rambo from a veteran into a cultural brand recognizable around the world. Looking back today, Rambo: First Blood Part 2 can be understood as far more than an action sequel. It is a case study in how cinema combines art, psychology, technology, and finance into a single product. It explores trauma while delivering entertainment. It relies on practical engineering while pursuing emotional impact. It takes investor capital and converts it into spectacle, symbolism, and storytelling. Before we follow Rambo deeper into the jungle itself, it is worth remembering that every frame we are about to examine exists because creative ambition, commercial risk, technical innovation, and human emotion converged into one of the defining action films of the 1980s. The first half of the story begins not in the jungle, but in confinement. Rambo exists in a place that feels disconnected from ordinary life, a man physically alive but emotionally frozen. The film wastes very little time establishing its central business proposition to the audience. Every successful blockbuster needs a value promise. Here, the promise is simple yet powerful. Place an extraordinary individual into an impossible situation and allow viewers to witness what happens. Within minutes, the narrative identifies its most valuable asset, the character of Rambo himself, and begins building a mission around him. From a storytelling perspective, this opening functions much like the research and development phase of a startup company. Before launching a product into the market, developers identify capabilities, limitations, and objectives. The film performs the same task. It reminds audiences of Rambo's unique skills while establishing the circumstances that will test those abilities. Rather than overwhelming viewers with complexity, the screenplay carefully introduces information in manageable stages. This creates clarity, which is one of the most important forms of narrative efficiency. When government officials approach Rambo with a proposed mission, the conversation carries more weight than a simple military briefing. Beneath the surface lies an emotional transaction. The same institutions that once failed him are now asking for his assistance. This immediately creates psychological tension. Audiences understand that the mission is not merely about reconnaissance. It is also about trust. Can Rambo believe the people giving the orders? Can he trust the system that previously abandoned him? These questions quietly increase emotional investment long before any combat begins. One reason the film's setup works so effectively is because it understands the importance of stakeholder alignment. In business projects, competing interests often create conflict. The same principle appears here. Military leadership wants information. Political figures want plausible outcomes. Bureaucratic systems want control. Rambo wants purpose. Because these motivations do not perfectly align, tension naturally emerges. The screenplay transforms organizational friction into dramatic momentum. As preparations begin, the movie gradually shifts from institutional spaces toward environments associated with action and uncertainty. Equipment is gathered. Objectives are clarified. Transportation is arranged. Each scene serves a specific narrative purpose. Nothing feels accidental. This efficiency resembles a carefully managed startup prototype phase, where every decision exists to move the project closer to launch. By minimizing unnecessary detours, the film preserves audience attention and directs emotional energy toward the upcoming mission. The introduction of supporting characters also demonstrates calculated narrative design. Certain individuals provide guidance, others create uncertainty, and some offer emotional connection. Each serves a functional role within the story ecosystem. Rather than existing solely for exposition, they influence Rambo's emotional state and shape audience expectations. Strong screenwriting often resembles organizational design. Every participant must contribute measurable value to the overall objective. Once the mission officially begins, the atmosphere changes dramatically. The controlled environment of planning gives way to the unpredictable reality of the jungle. This transition mirrors the moment when a company releases a product into the marketplace. Internal preparation can only accomplish so much. Eventually, real-world conditions take over. Unexpected variables emerge. Assumptions are tested. Risks become tangible. The film captures this transition with remarkable clarity. The jungle immediately reintroduces memories of war, but it also introduces operational uncertainty. Visibility decreases. Threats become difficult to identify. Information becomes incomplete. These conditions are psychologically effective because audiences naturally fear uncertainty more than certainty. A visible threat can be measured and understood. An invisible threat forces the imagination to work overtime. The film leverages this principle repeatedly throughout its first half. As Rambo advances deeper into enemy territory, the pacing remains deliberate rather than rushed. Modern action films sometimes mistake speed for engagement. This movie understands that anticipation can be more powerful than immediate payoff. By allowing tension to build gradually, the narrative increases the perceived value of future action sequences. In economic terms, the film is investing narrative capital before seeking emotional returns. One of the most interesting elements during this section is how the mission objective evolves emotionally. Officially, Rambo has been sent to gather information. Unofficially, he begins confronting the human reality behind the assignment. The possibility that prisoners remain abandoned transforms the operation from a procedural task into a moral challenge. Suddenly, success is no longer measured solely by mission parameters. It becomes connected to conscience. This shift significantly increases audience engagement because moral stakes often generate stronger emotional responses than logistical stakes. Viewers may not fully understand military procedures, but they understand loyalty, abandonment, and responsibility. By reframing the mission around these universal concepts, the screenplay broadens its emotional appeal without sacrificing momentum. The first encounters with danger further reinforce Rambo's capabilities while preserving vulnerability. Effective heroes cannot appear completely invincible too early. If success feels guaranteed, suspense disappears. The film carefully balances competence with uncertainty. Rambo demonstrates extraordinary skill, yet the environment remains dangerous enough to maintain tension. This balance creates trust between the filmmakers and the audience. The visual storytelling during these sequences deserves particular attention. Dense foliage, muddy terrain, flowing rivers, and hidden pathways are not merely background details. They function as operational obstacles. Every environmental feature increases complexity and forces adaptation. This design choice keeps the mission feeling dynamic rather than repetitive. The jungle constantly changes the rules of engagement. An especially important development occurs when Rambo encounters evidence suggesting that the mission's assumptions may be correct. What began as a search for information starts becoming something more personal. The emotional temperature rises noticeably. Viewers recognize that events are moving beyond the boundaries originally established by military leadership. The possibility of actual rescue introduces enormous narrative potential. Supporting relationships also become increasingly important during this stage. Human connection provides contrast to the violence and isolation surrounding the mission. Moments of trust and cooperation remind audiences what is ultimately at stake. Without these quieter interactions, action would feel mechanical. With them, action acquires emotional meaning. By the end of the film's first half, the narrative has successfully completed its prototyping phase. The objectives are clear. The risks are understood. The emotional stakes have expanded. Institutional agendas are beginning to clash with personal morality. Most importantly, Rambo is no longer merely observing events. He is becoming emotionally invested in their outcome. Like a startup moving from development into full-scale market testing, the story has gathered its resources, identified its challenges, and positioned itself for the far more dangerous decisions that lie ahead. The second half of the film begins at the precise moment when reconnaissance transforms into commitment. Up until this point, Rambo has operated within the boundaries of his assigned mission, even if he has questioned the motives behind it. Now those boundaries begin to collapse. What started as a data-gathering exercise becomes a direct confrontation with reality. In business terms, this resembles the moment when a company discovers that its market assumptions were correct, but far more complicated than expected. Success suddenly demands much greater risk than originally planned. The discovery of imprisoned soldiers fundamentally changes the emotional economics of the story. Information is no longer enough. Observation is no longer enough. The existence of real human beings suffering in captivity creates a moral obligation that Rambo finds impossible to ignore. This decision represents one of the most important psychological turning points in the film. The mission's official objectives and Rambo's personal objectives separate completely. From a narrative design perspective, this is where the screenplay begins collecting returns on investments made earlier in the story. Every moment of setup, every conversation about loyalty, every reference to abandonment, and every hint of institutional failure now starts generating emotional dividends. The audience understands why Rambo acts the way he does because the film has carefully prepared the foundation. This is effective storytelling because character decisions emerge naturally from established motivations rather than appearing artificially convenient. The consequences arrive quickly. Instead of being rewarded for initiative, Rambo becomes entangled in political calculations and bureaucratic priorities. The film suggests that some organizations become so focused on managing risk that they lose sight of their original purpose. This idea resonates because audiences frequently encounter similar dynamics in governments, corporations, and institutions. The conflict is no longer simply soldier versus enemy. It becomes individual conviction versus organizational self-preservation. When circumstances turn against Rambo, the tension increases dramatically because the audience realizes he can no longer rely on external support. Earlier portions of the mission operated within a framework of cooperation. Now survival depends largely upon personal resilience and adaptability. This shift creates a powerful sense of isolation. The jungle becomes even more hostile because it is no longer merely an operational environment. It becomes a battlefield where trust itself has become scarce. Effective action films understand that physical danger is most compelling when connected to emotional danger. Explosions alone rarely sustain audience engagement for long periods. What matters is what those explosions threaten. Here, every pursuit, ambush, and confrontation carries emotional weight because viewers understand what is at stake. Lives depend on success. Principles depend on success. Personal redemption depends on success. One of the film's strengths is how it continually forces adaptation. Every time Rambo appears to regain control of a situation, new obstacles emerge. This prevents momentum from becoming predictable. In startup terminology, the story repeatedly introduces market disruptions. Plans must evolve. Assumptions must be revised. Strategies must be adjusted. These changes keep both the protagonist and the audience actively engaged. The jungle itself continues functioning as an unpredictable variable. Rivers become barriers. Dense vegetation becomes concealment. Open spaces become vulnerabilities. The environment refuses to remain neutral. Instead, it constantly influences tactical decisions and emotional reactions. This dynamic relationship between character and setting helps the action feel organic rather than staged. As the conflict intensifies, Rambo increasingly relies upon creativity rather than brute force alone. This distinction is important. Audiences admire competence, but they become truly invested when characters demonstrate adaptability. The film repeatedly presents situations that cannot be solved through strength alone. Observation, patience, timing, and ingenuity become equally valuable resources. The supporting characters also gain greater significance during this phase. Relationships established earlier begin generating emotional consequences. Moments that initially appeared minor acquire new meaning. This is another example of narrative payoff efficiency. The screenplay avoids wasting emotional investments. Nearly every meaningful interaction contributes to later developments. A particularly effective aspect of the second half is its management of escalation. The challenges become progressively larger, yet they never feel disconnected from previous events. Each obstacle emerges logically from earlier decisions. This creates the impression of cause and effect rather than arbitrary spectacle. Strong storytelling often depends less on surprises and more on convincing progression. The action sequences themselves function almost like visual expressions of Rambo's internal psychology. He is no longer reacting passively to circumstances. He is actively shaping outcomes. Every successful maneuver reinforces the idea that personal conviction can overcome overwhelming institutional and military pressure. Whether viewers interpret this literally or symbolically, the emotional message remains clear. The film also understands the value of reversal. Earlier, Rambo operated as the hunted. Gradually, the balance begins shifting. The forces attempting to control or eliminate him discover that their assumptions were flawed. This reversal generates satisfaction because audiences have witnessed the protagonist endure setbacks and sacrifices. Success feels earned rather than granted. As the climax approaches, multiple narrative threads converge simultaneously. The rescue mission, the conflict with enemy forces, the betrayal by bureaucratic leadership, and Rambo's personal search for purpose all begin moving toward resolution. This convergence creates the feeling of accelerating momentum. The story is no longer expanding outward. It is focusing inward toward decisive outcomes. One reason the climax remains memorable is because it delivers both physical and emotional payoff. Viewers receive the spectacle they were promised, but they also receive answers to deeper questions established earlier. What does loyalty mean? What responsibilities do institutions have toward individuals they send into danger? Can a person abandoned by the system still act with honor? The film may not offer nuanced answers to every question, but it understands that audiences need emotional closure alongside action. By the time the final confrontations conclude, the story has effectively completed its product-market test. The narrative risks introduced during the opening hours have generated substantial audience engagement. The rescue mission achieves meaning beyond military objectives. Rambo emerges not merely as a survivor, but as a symbol of perseverance against systems that prioritize convenience over responsibility. The second half succeeds because it transforms action into payoff, tension into release, and uncertainty into conviction. Everything established during the film's opening movements ultimately converges into a conclusion that rewards emotional investment while reinforcing the heroic identity at the center of the franchise. One of the reasons Rambo became such an enduring action hero is that his greatest battles are rarely physical. Muscles, weapons, and survival skills may define his appearance, but psychology defines his identity. Beneath the confident exterior exists a man carrying experiences that permanently altered his relationship with the world. The film presents a character whose behavior can only be fully understood by examining trauma, trust, isolation, and the constant tension between personal conscience and institutional authority. At the beginning of the story, Rambo exhibits many characteristics associated with individuals who have experienced prolonged exposure to extreme stress. He appears emotionally withdrawn, socially detached, and highly cautious. These traits are not presented as weaknesses. Instead, they function as survival adaptations. When someone spends years operating in environments where mistakes can result in death, vigilance becomes habitual. Even after the immediate danger disappears, the psychological patterns often remain. The mission proposal creates an interesting behavioral economics dilemma. Rationally, accepting the assignment carries enormous risk. Physically, emotionally, and professionally, the safest option would be refusal. Yet Rambo accepts.
Why?
Traditional economic models assume people maximize personal benefit and minimize personal cost. Human psychology is more complicated. Individuals frequently pursue meaning even when doing so increases risk. For Rambo, purpose possesses greater value than comfort. This decision highlights the concept of opportunity cost. Every choice requires surrendering alternative possibilities. By accepting the mission, Rambo sacrifices safety in exchange for significance. The opportunity cost is substantial, yet from his perspective the alternative, remaining inactive, may feel psychologically worse. This illustrates an important principle of human behavior. Perceived meaning often outweighs material incentives. Trust also plays a central role in the character's psychology. Throughout the film, Rambo repeatedly encounters situations where he must decide whether institutions deserve confidence. Previous experiences have taught him caution. The government asks for cooperation, but history provides reasons for skepticism. This creates a persistent internal conflict. He wants to believe in the mission's purpose, yet he remains aware that organizations sometimes prioritize political objectives over individual welfare. Behavioral economists often discuss principal-agent problems, situations where decision-makers and stakeholders possess different incentives. The film repeatedly explores this concept. Military leaders, bureaucrats, and politicians pursue objectives that do not always align with the interests of those carrying out the mission. Rambo instinctively recognizes this misalignment. His skepticism is not irrational paranoia. It is a response shaped by experience. One fascinating aspect of his personality is the combination of independence and loyalty. At first glance, these qualities appear contradictory. Independent individuals often resist authority, while loyal individuals typically cooperate with structures and organizations. Rambo embodies both. He distrusts institutions, yet remains deeply committed to the people those institutions are supposed to serve. His loyalty is directed toward individuals rather than bureaucracies. This distinction explains many of his decisions. When faced with a choice between obeying instructions and helping vulnerable people, he consistently prioritizes human beings over procedures. Psychologically, this reflects a moral framework rooted in personal responsibility rather than organizational compliance. Such individuals frequently become both valuable assets and difficult employees because they refuse to separate ethics from action. The film also explores the psychological burden of leadership. Although Rambo does not occupy a formal command position, circumstances repeatedly force him into leadership roles. Leadership creates unique pressures because decisions affect more than the decision-maker. Every action carries consequences for others. This responsibility increases stress, while simultaneously increasing emotional commitment. Trauma significantly influences how Rambo evaluates risk. People who have survived extreme situations often develop unconventional relationships with danger. Threats that terrify ordinary individuals may appear manageable, while seemingly minor betrayals can provoke intense reactions. Physical danger is familiar territory for Rambo. Emotional betrayal is far more disruptive because it attacks the fragile trust he continues trying to maintain. The film repeatedly demonstrates his preference for action over discussion. This tendency is not simply a characteristic of action heroes. Psychologically, action provides certainty. Discussion often produces ambiguity. Individuals exposed to chaotic environments sometimes develop strong preferences for direct solutions because direct solutions generate immediate feedback. Decisions produce results. Results provide clarity. Another important element of his psychology involves identity. Many people derive identity from careers, relationships, communities, or achievements. Rambo's circumstances have stripped away many traditional sources of self-definition. As a result, purpose becomes central to his sense of self. Missions are not merely assignments. They are opportunities to reaffirm who he believes he is. The rescue objective resonates so strongly because it aligns with his personal values. Human motivation increases dramatically when external goals match internal beliefs. Psychologists refer to this as value congruence. The closer a task aligns with deeply held principles, the greater the willingness to endure hardship. The mission becomes meaningful not because it was assigned, but because it reflects what Rambo considers morally important. His interactions with allies reveal another layer of complexity. Despite his reserved nature, he demonstrates a clear capacity for connection. He is not emotionally incapable. He is emotionally cautious. There is a significant difference. Trauma often teaches individuals to protect themselves from future disappointment. Relationships become valuable but dangerous investments. Trust requires vulnerability, and vulnerability creates risk. The antagonists in the story serve psychological functions beyond simply creating conflict. They represent forces attempting to reduce human beings into instruments, statistics, or political variables. Rambo consistently rejects this perspective. His actions suggest that individuals possess intrinsic value regardless of strategic convenience. This belief drives many of his most important decisions throughout the film. From a behavioral economics perspective, Rambo repeatedly chooses long-term moral rewards over short-term practical benefits. Compliance would often be safer. Obedience would often be easier. Yet he continues pursuing actions consistent with his conscience. This pattern reflects what economists sometimes describe as utility beyond material outcomes. People seek dignity, meaning, justice, and self-respect alongside physical security. By the conclusion of the film, Rambo emerges as a compelling study in resilience. He is not fearless. He is not emotionally untouched by suffering. Instead, he demonstrates the remarkable human capacity to continue acting despite fear, disappointment, and uncertainty. His psychology combines trauma with purpose, skepticism with loyalty, and independence with compassion. The result is a character who remains memorable not because of the battles he fights, but because of the internal principles guiding every decision he makes. In many ways, the film's greatest psychological insight is that true strength is not the absence of pain. It is the determination to remain loyal to one's values despite it. To understand the financial story behind Rambo, First Blood Part 2, we must begin by recognizing that every blockbuster is a high-stakes capital allocation exercise. Audiences often see helicopters, explosions, and heroic rescues. Investors see budgets, forecasts, distribution agreements, marketing expenditures, and revenue projections. What ultimately appears on screen is the visible result of thousands of financial decisions made months or even years before a ticket is ever sold. The film was produced with an estimated budget of approximately $25 million, a substantial investment for an action film in 1985. To modern audiences, this number may not seem extraordinary. In its era, however, it represented significant investor confidence. Adjusted for inflation, the financial commitment becomes even more impressive. Studio executives were not simply funding another sequel. They were betting that the Rambo brand possessed enough audience recognition and international appeal to justify large-scale expansion. Every major production begins with a basic financial question: how much revenue must this project generate to become profitable? Contrary to popular belief, a film does not become profitable the moment it earns back its production budget. Distribution costs, marketing expenditures, theater revenue sharing, and administrative expenses must also be considered. Industry analysts often estimate that a movie needs to generate roughly 2 to 2.5 times its production budget at the global box office before achieving comfortable profitability. Applying that logic here creates an interesting framework. A $25 million production budget may require roughly $50 to $65 million in global theatrical revenue before investors begin seeing attractive returns. This threshold represents the break-even zone. Anything significantly above it increases the likelihood of strong profitability and franchise expansion opportunities. The remarkable achievement of Rambo, First Blood Part 2 is how dramatically it exceeded those expectations. The film generated approximately $300 million worldwide during its theatrical run. From an ROI perspective, this transformed the project from a successful sequel into a major commercial phenomenon. The gap between investment and return became so large that the film effectively validated the long-term economic potential of the entire Rambo franchise. Investors often evaluate projects based not only on profitability, but also on return efficiency. A film costing $200 million and earning $400 million may generate substantial revenue, but its efficiency differs dramatically from a film costing $25 million and earning $300 million. The latter demonstrates significantly stronger capital multiplication. In simple terms, each dollar invested generated far more revenue. This is one reason the movie remains such an interesting business case study. Marketing played an essential role in achieving these results. Studios understand that production spending creates a product, but marketing spending creates awareness. Even the most impressive film cannot succeed if audiences remain unaware of its existence. During the mid-1980s, promotional campaigns relied heavily on theatrical trailers, television advertisements, magazine placements, newspaper coverage, retail partnerships, and large-format posters. The marketing strategy focused on clarity. Audiences instantly understood what was being offered: heroism, action, spectacle, survival. The promotional material rarely complicated the value proposition. Instead, it communicated a simple promise: one of cinema's toughest heroes was returning for a larger and more dangerous mission. Effective marketing often succeeds because it reduces decision-making friction. Consumers know exactly what experience they are purchasing. Sylvester Stallone himself functioned as a powerful marketing asset. In financial terms, star actors often reduce investment uncertainty. Consumers already associate them with specific emotional experiences and entertainment expectations. By the time this film entered production, Stallone had become one of Hollywood's most commercially valuable performers. His presence alone strengthened international sales negotiations and increased distributor confidence. International distribution represented another crucial revenue pillar. Many films depend heavily on domestic performance. Action movies frequently possess stronger global scalability because visual storytelling transcends language barriers. Audiences in different countries may interpret dialogue differently, but explosions, survival, courage, and physical determination require little translation. This universal accessibility significantly expanded the film's revenue potential. Merchandising opportunities also contributed to the broader economic ecosystem surrounding the franchise. While theatrical revenue remained the primary income source, successful action properties often generate secondary streams through licensed products, posters, toys, apparel, home entertainment releases, and television syndication agreements. These auxiliary revenues may appear small individually, but collectively, they can meaningfully increase long-term profitability. Home video represented a particularly important factor during the 1980s. The VHS market was expanding rapidly, creating additional monetization opportunities beyond theatrical exhibition. Studios increasingly recognized that successful films could enjoy multiple revenue life cycles. First came theatrical release, then home video sales, then television licensing. Each stage extended the earning potential of the intellectual property. One fascinating aspect of the film's economics involves risk concentration. The project placed considerable reliance on a single central asset, the Rambo character. In business, concentration risk occurs when success depends heavily on one variable. If audiences lost interest in the protagonist, much of the franchise's value proposition would disappear. The filmmakers therefore invested heavily in reinforcing Rambo's iconic status throughout the production and marketing process. The film's release timing also reflects strategic thinking. Studios frequently analyze competitive landscapes before selecting launch windows. Releasing too close to major competitors can divide audience attention and reduce revenue efficiency. Effective scheduling maximizes visibility while minimizing direct competition. Although audiences rarely notice these calculations, release strategy can significantly influence overall profitability. From an EBITDA-style perspective, the movie demonstrates impressive operational leverage. Once the substantial upfront costs of production and marketing were absorbed, additional ticket sales generated increasingly attractive returns. This dynamic explains why blockbuster success can become extraordinarily lucrative. The infrastructure costs remain relatively fixed while revenue continues growing. Another notable element is franchise valuation. Investors were not merely evaluating the profitability of one film. They were evaluating the future value of the Rambo brand itself. Successful sequels increase intellectual property value because they prove sustained consumer demand. This enhanced value can influence future financing arrangements, licensing negotiations, and distribution agreements. The movie's financial success also created strategic benefits beyond direct revenue. Studios gain credibility when large investments produce strong returns. Successful projects improve relationships with distributors, strengthen investor confidence, and encourage future capital allocation. In this sense, blockbuster victories often generate organizational momentum that extends well beyond individual productions. Looking back today, Rambo: First Blood Part 2 stands as a remarkable example of cinematic ROI. Approximately $25 million in production spending helped generate roughly $300 million in global box office revenue, alongside substantial secondary earnings through home entertainment and licensing channels. What began as a sequel evolved into a powerful demonstration of how storytelling, star power, marketing discipline, and audience psychology can combine to create exceptional financial outcomes. Beneath the explosions and action sequences lies a fascinating business story. A relatively modest investment transformed into one of the most profitable action film successes of its era, proving that when art, branding, and capital align effectively, cinema can become both a cultural event and a financial triumph. When audiences watch Rambo: First Blood Part 2, they see jungle warfare, helicopter battles, explosions, and daring rescues. What they do not immediately see is the enormous technological infrastructure required to make those moments believable in 1985. This was an era before digital artists could create entire environments on computers. Filmmakers had to solve problems physically. Every explosion needed real coordination. Every helicopter sequence required actual aircraft. Every dangerous stunt demanded planning, engineering, and logistical precision. The film is therefore not only an action story, but also a fascinating study in practical filmmaking technology. One of the first technological decisions any production makes involves choosing image capture systems. During the mid-1980s, productions like this typically relied on high-quality 35mm film cameras. Unlike modern digital sensors, film stock physically recorded light onto chemical emulsions. Cinematographers had to carefully manage exposure because mistakes could not be instantly reviewed on high-resolution monitors. Every shot carried both artistic and financial consequences. Film stock itself represented an important technological asset. Different stocks produced different color responses, contrast levels, grain structures, and dynamic ranges. The filmmakers selected materials capable of capturing the lush greens of the jungle while preserving sufficient detail during bright daylight sequences and darker combat environments. These decisions influenced audience perception long before post-production even began. Camera placement also played a crucial psychological role. The film frequently positions viewers close to Rambo, creating intimacy during moments of tension and survival. At other times, wider compositions emphasize environmental scale and isolation. Technology and psychology become inseparable here. The camera is not merely recording events. It is guiding emotional interpretation. Lens choices influence how viewers feel about distance, danger, and vulnerability. Speaking of lenses, they function as some of the most important storytelling tools in cinema. Wide lenses exaggerate environmental scale and spatial relationships. Longer lenses compress distance and isolate subjects from their surroundings. Throughout the film, lens selection helps communicate both physical danger and emotional intensity. Audiences rarely notice these choices consciously, yet they strongly influence perception. Action filmmaking in the 1980s depended heavily on practical effects. Modern audiences accustomed to extensive CGI sometimes underestimate how challenging these sequences were to execute. Explosions had to be physically constructed. Vehicles had to be genuinely damaged. Pyrotechnic teams carefully controlled blasts to maximize visual impact while maintaining safety. Each sequence required collaboration between engineers, stunt coordinators, camera crews, and special effects technicians. Helicopter sequences provide an excellent example of technological complexity. Today, digital effects can supplement aerial photography extensively. During the production of this film, helicopters were often real aircraft performing genuine maneuvers. Capturing these shots required extensive coordination between pilots, cinematographers, safety teams, and production managers. Every minute of flight time represented both operational expense and logistical challenge. The film's action choreography also demonstrates sophisticated planning. Successful action scenes rarely emerge spontaneously. They are designed much like engineering projects. Movements are mapped. Camera angles are coordinated. Safety protocols are established. Timing is rehearsed repeatedly. What appears chaotic on screen is often the result of extraordinary organizational discipline behind the scenes. Editing technology represented another crucial component of the filmmaking process. Unlike contemporary digital editing environments, such as DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere Pro, editors during this era often worked with physical film elements. Scenes were reviewed, selected, and assembled through labor-intensive processes. Every cut required thoughtful consideration because modifications consumed both time and resources. Yet despite these technological limitations by modern standards, editors achieved remarkable pacing efficiency. The film maintains momentum through careful rhythm management. Action scenes accelerate emotional intensity. Quieter moments provide recovery periods. This balance prevents audience fatigue while sustaining engagement. Editing is often described as invisible storytelling because viewers experience its effects without necessarily recognizing its presence. Sound recording technology also played a significant role. Capturing usable dialogue in challenging outdoor environments is difficult even with modern equipment. Jungle locations introduce wind, wildlife sounds, environmental interference, and logistical constraints. Production sound teams work constantly to preserve clarity while maintaining realism. Their success often goes unnoticed because audiences naturally focus on characters rather than recording technology. Visual effects during the 1980s frequently relied upon optical techniques rather than computer-generated imagery. Certain enhancements required creative photographic processes, miniature work, compositing methods, and specialized laboratory procedures. These solutions demanded significant technical expertise. Modern software can often accomplish similar tasks with a few clicks, but earlier generations relied on ingenuity, experimentation, and craftsmanship. Color grading during this period also differed significantly from contemporary workflows. Today, filmmakers can manipulate color extensively using digital tools. Modern productions often utilize systems such as DaVinci Resolve to adjust contrast, saturation, exposure, and tonal balance with extraordinary precision. In 1985, many color decisions were influenced by film stock selection, laboratory processing, lighting design, and photochemical timing processes. The production's reliance on practical environments contributed substantially to its psychological authenticity. Real locations contain imperfections that digital environments sometimes struggle to replicate. Variations in light, weather, vegetation, terrain, and atmosphere create subtle visual complexity. These details help convince audiences that characters genuinely inhabit their surroundings rather than performing inside constructed simulations. From a workflow perspective, the film resembles a large-scale manufacturing operation. Departments responsible for cameras, lighting, sound, effects, costumes, transportation, and logistics all depend upon synchronized execution. A delay in one area can affect dozens of others. This interconnected system demonstrates how filmmaking technology extends far beyond cameras and computers. It encompasses every process required to transform ideas into finished images. Modern filmmakers often have access to technologies such as ARRI, Alexa LF cameras, virtual production environments, drone cinematography, advanced CGI pipelines, cloud-based collaboration systems, and sophisticated color management workflows. Yet examining a film like Rambo, First Blood Part 2 reveals an important lesson. Technology does not create emotion by itself. Instead, technology serves creative objectives. Cameras capture images, but storytelling creates meaning. The movie's enduring appeal demonstrates the effectiveness of this philosophy. Despite being produced decades before modern digital workflows emerged, its action sequences remain engaging because technological choices consistently support narrative goals. Every helicopter, explosion, lens selection, and editing decision exists to strengthen audience immersion rather than merely showcase technical capability. Ultimately, the filmmaking technology behind Rambo, First Blood Part 2 represents a fascinating intersection of engineering and art. Practical effects teams transformed physical materials into cinematic spectacle. Camera crews translated movement into visual tension. Editors converted raw footage into emotional momentum. Sound departments transformed noise into immersion. Together, these technologies functioned like components within a larger storytelling machine. The result was a film that not only entertained audiences, but also demonstrated how thoughtful technical execution can amplify psychology, emotion, and narrative power. Long before digital filmmaking became dominant, productions like this proved that innovation is not defined by computers alone. It is defined by the creative application of available tools in pursuit of unforgettable experiences. Behind every successful action film exists a second story that audiences rarely see. It is the story of schedules, payrolls, transportation networks, department coordination, equipment logistics, insurance policies, contingency planning, and leadership structures. While viewers remember helicopters soaring above jungles and explosive firefights erupting across the screen, production managers remember call sheets, weather forecasts, overtime calculations, and resource allocation. Rambo, First Blood Part 2 provides a fascinating example of how large-scale filmmaking operates as a complex industrial enterprise. Film productions resemble temporary corporations. For several months, hundreds of individuals from different specialties unite around a single objective. Camera operators, stunt performers, lighting technicians, costume designers, transportation crews, visual effects specialists, accountants, caterers, production assistants, and executives must function as one coordinated system. The challenge is immense because every department possesses unique priorities while remaining dependent upon every other department. From a management perspective, the first major task involves defining project scope. In business, scope determines resource requirements, budgets, timelines, and staffing needs. The filmmakers behind Rambo, First Blood Part 2 committed themselves to an ambitious scope that included jungle locations, large-scale action sequences, aircraft operations, practical explosions, complex stunt work, and extensive outdoor shooting. Each commitment increased both production value and operational complexity. Once scope is established, scheduling becomes one of the most valuable management tools available. Time is not merely a measurement during film production. Time is capital. Every additional shooting day generates expenses. Equipment rentals continue. Crew salaries continue. Transportation costs continue. Insurance obligations continue. Delays can rapidly transform manageable budgets into financial concerns. This reality explains why production schedules are often planned with extraordinary precision. Every shooting day typically includes detailed objectives. Specific scenes must be completed. Equipment must arrive at designated locations. Personnel must be available when needed. The production essentially operates like a large-scale logistics company whose product happens to be storytelling. Location management presents another fascinating challenge. The jungle environments featured throughout the film create powerful visual authenticity, but they also introduce operational complications. Remote locations increase transportation costs. Equipment becomes more difficult to move. Weather conditions become less predictable. Communication becomes more complicated. Every environmental advantage for storytelling often creates additional management responsibilities behind the scenes. Leadership structures therefore become critically important. Film productions generally operate through layered hierarchies designed to improve efficiency. Producers oversee strategic objectives. Directors guide creative execution. Assistant directors coordinate operational schedules. Department heads manage specialized teams. This hierarchy exists not because creativity requires bureaucracy, but because large-scale collaboration requires organization. The relationship between producers and directors is particularly interesting from an economic standpoint. Producers often focus on budget control, resource management, and overall project viability. Directors focus on storytelling quality, artistic vision, and audience impact. The most successful productions achieve balance between these perspectives. Too much emphasis on cost reduction can weaken creative quality. Too much emphasis on creative ambition can threaten financial sustainability. Action sequences provide excellent examples of this balancing act. A director may envision increasingly elaborate set pieces. Producers must evaluate whether the additional expenditure creates sufficient audience value. Every helicopter flight, explosion, stunt, and special effect involves measurable costs. Production management therefore becomes a continuous exercise in evaluating return on investment. Workforce allocation also deserves attention. Large productions frequently employ hundreds of individuals whose workloads fluctuate throughout different phases of production. Certain departments become highly active during pre-production. Others reach peak activity during filming. Post-production introduces additional staffing requirements. Effective managers allocate human resources according to project needs while minimizing inefficiencies. One of the most overlooked aspects of filmmaking is risk management. Every major production faces uncertainty. Weather may disrupt schedules. Equipment may malfunction. Locations may become inaccessible. Key personnel may become unavailable. Safety concerns may require adjustments. Professional production teams constantly develop contingency plans because uncertainty is unavoidable. The action-heavy nature of Rambo, First Blood Part 2 likely required especially rigorous safety coordination. Practical explosions, vehicle operations, aerial photography, and stunt performances introduce significant operational risks. Safety officers, stunt coordinators, and department leaders must work together to ensure that ambitious creative objectives do not compromise crew welfare. Successful productions understand that safety is not separate from efficiency. It is an essential component of efficiency. Communication systems represent another crucial management tool. Information must flow rapidly between departments. Camera teams need updates from lighting crews. Transportation departments require schedule adjustments from assistant directors. Production offices coordinate with location managers. Without reliable communication structures, even relatively simple productions can experience costly disruptions. Budget tracking occurs continuously throughout filming. Contrary to popular assumptions, financial oversight does not stop once production begins. Accountants and production managers regularly compare actual expenditures against forecasts. If spending increases unexpectedly in one area, adjustments may be necessary elsewhere. This process resembles corporate financial management, where executives continually monitor performance against operational plans. The concept of opportunity cost also applies throughout production. Choosing to spend additional time perfecting one sequence may reduce available resources elsewhere. Investing heavily in one action set piece may limit options for another. Managers constantly evaluate trade-offs because resources remain finite regardless of creative ambition. Another fascinating element involves morale management. Film productions often require long hours, challenging conditions, and intense collaboration. Leadership extends beyond logistics and budgets. Effective leaders maintain motivation, resolve conflicts, and preserve momentum during difficult periods. A highly skilled crew operating with low morale frequently performs worse than a motivated crew facing challenging circumstances. Looking at the finished film, audiences may assume the action appears effortless. The reality is far more impressive. Every successful sequence represents hundreds of coordinated decisions involving scheduling, budgeting, transportation, communication, staffing, and leadership. The movie's energy on screen reflects extraordinary discipline behind the camera. Chaos was carefully organized so that excitement could appear natural. Ultimately, Rambo, First Blood Part 2 serves as a compelling case study in studio economics and production management. The film demonstrates that cinema is not merely an artistic endeavor. It is also a large-scale operational enterprise requiring strategic planning, workforce coordination, financial oversight, and effective leadership. Every day saved protects capital. Every delay consumes capital. Every logistical victory improves efficiency. In this sense, filmmaking resembles corporate project management on an enormous scale, where creativity remains the objective but organization makes achievement possible. The jungle may have been the setting for Rambo's mission, but behind the scenes an equally complex mission was unfolding, transforming a multi-million-dollar investment into a finished product capable of captivating audiences around the world. One of the most interesting aspects of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, is that it occupies a unique space between historical reality and cinematic mythology. The film draws inspiration from genuine anxieties and unresolved questions that emerged after the Vietnam War, yet it does not attempt to function as a documentary. Instead, it transforms historical concerns into a dramatic action narrative. To fully understand the film, we must separate historical facts, political realities, military procedures, and cinematic storytelling while appreciating how they intersect. The central premise revolves around the possibility that American prisoners of war remained in Southeast Asia after the official conclusion of the Vietnam conflict. During the years following the war, this subject generated significant public debate. Families, veterans, politicians, journalists, and advocacy groups often questioned whether all missing personnel had been properly accounted for. These concerns created an emotional environment in which stories about abandoned prisoners resonated strongly with audiences. Historically, extensive investigations were conducted regarding prisoners of war and military personnel listed as missing in action. Over time, government agencies, independent researchers, military historians, and international organizations examined available evidence. The prevailing historical consensus eventually concluded that there was no credible proof of large numbers of surviving American prisoners remaining in captivity after the war's conclusion. However, during the era in which the film was produced, uncertainty surrounding the issue remained emotionally powerful for many people. This distinction is important because the film does not present itself as a historical investigation. Instead, it explores a cultural fear. Cinema often transforms societal anxieties into dramatic narratives. Monster films transform fears of the unknown into creatures. Science fiction films transform technological uncertainty into futuristic scenarios. In a similar way, Rambo, First Blood Part 2 transforms unresolved post-war emotions into a rescue mission. From a historical perspective, the portrayal of Vietnam itself is heavily stylized. Real military operations involve extensive intelligence networks, supply chains, diplomatic considerations, communications infrastructure, and organizational complexity. Films frequently simplify these realities because audiences require clear narratives. The objective is emotional comprehension rather than procedural accuracy. The character of Rambo also functions more as a symbolic figure than a historically typical soldier. Real military operations are team-oriented endeavors involving coordinated units and extensive support structures. The image of a single individual independently influencing major strategic outcomes belongs more to mythology than military doctrine. Yet mythology serves important cultural functions. Heroic figures often embody qualities societies admire or wish to reclaim. Survival aspects of the film present a mixture of realism and dramatic exaggeration. Certain skills demonstrated by Rambo reflect genuine military training principles. Navigation, camouflage, situational awareness, environmental adaptation, and resourcefulness are all important components of survival instruction. Experienced personnel often develop impressive capabilities through rigorous preparation and practical experience. However, the film understandably compresses time and complexity for dramatic effect. Real survival situations often involve prolonged uncertainty, exhaustion, logistical challenges, and physical limitations. Cinema condenses these experiences into forms that maintain pacing and audience engagement. This does not necessarily make the portrayal ineffective. It simply means the objectives differ from those of educational training materials. The jungle environment itself is depicted with a considerable degree of visual authenticity. Tropical environments genuinely present extraordinary challenges. Heat, humidity, insects, limited visibility, difficult terrain, and unpredictable weather all complicate movement and decision-making. Military historians frequently note that environmental conditions can influence outcomes as significantly as opposing forces. In this respect, the film accurately communicates the oppressive nature of jungle operations. Weapons and military equipment depicted throughout the film generally reflect technologies available during the period, although dramatic presentation occasionally prioritizes spectacle over strict realism. Action cinema often amplifies the effectiveness of equipment because audiences respond emotionally to visual power. Real-world military engagements are typically more complex, less predictable, and less cinematic than their fictional counterparts. One fascinating scientific aspect involves stress physiology. Throughout the film, Rambo operates under extraordinary psychological pressure. Modern neuroscience confirms that high-stress situations trigger hormonal responses involving adrenaline and cortisol. These chemicals can temporarily enhance focus, reaction speed, and physical performance. The film's portrayal of heightened determination, therefore, contains a foundation in genuine biological processes. Yet science also reminds us that prolonged exposure to extreme stress carries significant costs. Fatigue accumulates. Decision quality may decline. Physical recovery becomes increasingly difficult. The human body possesses remarkable adaptive capabilities, but it remains subject to biological limitations. Action cinema often emphasizes exceptional performance while minimizing the long-term consequences associated with sustained stress exposure. The psychological effects of combat receive somewhat more realistic treatment than many viewers might initially recognize. Veterans frequently describe difficulties related to trust, reintegration, identity, and emotional adjustment. While Rambo's experiences are dramatized, the underlying themes reflect real challenges encountered by many individuals returning from conflict zones. This psychological dimension contributes substantially to the character's enduring resonance. Another area worth examining involves military bureaucracy. Large organizations inevitably rely upon procedures, reporting systems, chains of command, and institutional priorities. The film portrays these structures as sources of frustration and conflict. While real organizations are considerably more nuanced than cinematic depictions suggest, the tension between individual initiative and organizational constraints represents a genuine challenge within many complex institutions. Historically, the film also reflects broader cultural trends of the 1980s. During this period, American cinema frequently revisited Vietnam through lenses emphasizing heroism, redemption, and renewed confidence. These narratives often functioned less as literal historical interpretations and more as cultural conversations about identity, memory, and national self-perception. Understanding this context helps explain why the movie achieved such significant popularity. From a scientific standpoint, one of the most accurate elements may actually be the film's portrayal of adaptability. Human beings possess extraordinary capacities for learning, problem-solving, and environmental adjustment. Under difficult circumstances, individuals often develop creative solutions to challenges that initially appear overwhelming. This capacity for adaptation remains one of the defining characteristics of our species. The film's greatest departure from strict realism lies not in any individual scene, but in its overall narrative structure. Real history is messy, ambiguous, and often unresolved. Cinema frequently seeks clarity, resolution, and emotional closure. Rambo's journey transforms complicated historical concerns into a focused moral narrative with identifiable heroes, villains, and outcomes. This simplification is a storytelling choice rather than a historical claim. Ultimately, Rambo: First Blood Part 2 should be understood as a blend of historical inspiration, psychological truth, military imagination, and cinematic symbolism. It captures real emotions associated with the Vietnam era while employing fictional scenarios to explore themes of loyalty, sacrifice, abandonment, and redemption. Its scientific accuracy varies depending on the subject being examined, but its psychological observations often prove more durable than its tactical realism. The film succeeds not because it perfectly recreates history, but because it transforms historical uncertainty into a compelling narrative that audiences can emotionally understand. In doing so, it reveals how cinema often operates, not as a mirror reflecting reality exactly, but as a lens that interprets reality through the language of story. Cinematography is often described as the art of painting with light, but in practical terms it is far more technical than that phrase suggests. Every image in Rambo, First Blood Part 2 represents a series of engineering decisions involving lenses, exposure, composition, movement, color relationships, and visual psychology. Long before viewers emotionally react to a scene, the cinematography has already guided their attention, shaped their expectations, and influenced their interpretation of events. The film's visual language plays a major role in transforming a straightforward action narrative into an immersive cinematic experience. One of the first visual characteristics audiences notice is the overwhelming presence of the jungle environment. Cinematographically, the jungle presents both opportunities and challenges. Dense vegetation creates visual texture, depth, and atmosphere. At the same time, it complicates lighting, framing, and camera movement. Natural light becomes inconsistent as sunlight filters through layers of foliage. Cinematographers must continuously adapt to changing conditions while preserving visual continuity. The film frequently uses environmental density as a storytelling tool. Trees, vines, shadows, and vegetation partially obscure the frame, creating uncertainty. Viewers rarely possess complete visual information. This technique aligns perfectly with the psychological themes of surveillance, concealment, and danger. When audiences cannot fully see their surroundings, anxiety naturally increases. The cinematography, therefore, becomes an active participant in storytelling rather than merely recording events. Lens selection contributes significantly to this effect. Wide-angle lenses are often used to emphasize environmental scale and place characters within larger landscapes. These lenses create a sense of immersion by allowing viewers to experience the vastness of the jungle. In contrast, longer focal lengths compress space and isolate subjects. This visual compression can make enemies appear closer, threats feel more immediate, and situations seem more claustrophobic. Composition throughout the film frequently reinforces themes of isolation. Rambo is often positioned against expansive backgrounds, visually emphasizing the imbalance between an individual and the forces surrounding him. Even when he occupies the center of the frame, environmental elements frequently dominate the composition. This creates a recurring visual reminder that survival requires confronting overwhelming odds. One of the most effective principles used by the cinematographers is depth layering. Instead of presenting flat images, scenes often contain foreground, middle ground, and background elements simultaneously. Branches may partially obscure the frame. Characters occupy intermediate space. Distant terrain extends into the background. This layered approach increases realism while also creating visual complexity that keeps audiences engaged. Lighting design deserves particular attention because the film relies heavily on naturalistic environments. Unlike controlled studio productions, jungle locations present unpredictable lighting conditions. Cinematographers must shape available light rather than simply create it from scratch. Reflectors, diffusion materials, supplemental lighting equipment, and careful scheduling help maintain visual consistency despite environmental variability. The contrast between light and shadow functions as a recurring visual motif. Bright daylight scenes often emphasize vulnerability because visibility increases. Darker environments emphasize uncertainty and concealment. This relationship mirrors the narrative itself. Information and ignorance constantly compete. Revelation and secrecy coexist. Light becomes more than illumination, it becomes symbolism. Color science also plays a subtle but important role. Modern filmmakers often discuss digital color workflows, LUTs, and advanced grading systems. During the era of this film, color decisions relied more heavily on film stock characteristics, lighting choices, laboratory processing, and photochemical timing. Despite these limitations, the visual palette remains highly effective. Greens dominate much of the environment, reinforcing themes of nature, concealment, and survival. Earth tones frequently contrast with military equipment, uniforms, and machinery. This visual distinction creates separation between human systems and natural environments. Technology enters the jungle as an external force. The landscape appears ancient and indifferent. These color relationships quietly reinforce narrative themes without requiring explicit dialogue. Camera movement throughout the film is carefully calibrated to emotional intensity. During quieter moments, movements tend to be restrained and observational. During action sequences, camera motion becomes more energetic and immediate. This variation influences audience physiology. Faster movement often increases excitement and urgency, while stable compositions encourage reflection and situational awareness. Aerial cinematography provides another important visual dimension. Helicopter shots reveal scale that ground-level photography cannot easily communicate. From above, audiences gain perspective regarding terrain, distance, and operational complexity. These views transform the jungle from a collection of individual obstacles into a vast, strategic environment. The psychological effect is significant because viewers suddenly appreciate the enormity of the challenges confronting the protagonist. Dynamic range is another concept worth examining. Human vision can perceive extraordinary variations between highlights and shadows. Cameras possess more limited capabilities. Cinematographers constantly balance exposure to preserve important visual information. Jungle environments are particularly demanding because bright sunlight and deep shadows often coexist within the same frame. Successfully managing these conditions requires considerable technical expertise. Visual geometry also contributes to emotional storytelling. Many action scenes use diagonal compositions, asymmetrical framing, and directional movement to create energy. Stable horizontal lines often communicate control and balance. Diagonal elements suggest instability, momentum, and conflict. The film repeatedly employs these principles to increase visual engagement during high-intensity sequences. One fascinating aspect of the cinematography is its commitment to physical authenticity. Because many action sequences rely on practical effects and real environments, light behaves naturally. Dust interacts with sunlight. Smoke diffuses highlights. Reflections occur organically. These seemingly minor details contribute substantially to audience immersion because they align with everyday visual experience. The film also demonstrates an understanding of visual escalation. Early scenes establish environmental rules and visual expectations. As the story progresses, compositions become increasingly dramatic, movement becomes more dynamic, and imagery grows more intense. This progression mirrors the narrative structure itself. Visual storytelling and plot development advance together. From an engineering perspective, cinematography ultimately involves translating three-dimensional reality into two-dimensional images while preserving emotional impact. Every lens choice, camera angle, lighting adjustment, and framing decision influences how audiences interpret information. The process resembles data compression. Vast amounts of visual information must be distilled into images that communicate meaning efficiently. Looking back today, Rambo, First Blood Part 2 remains an impressive example of visual engineering in action cinema. Its cinematography combines practical problem-solving with psychological insight. Light becomes emotion. Composition becomes narrative. Movement becomes tension. Color becomes atmosphere. The filmmakers understood that audiences experience stories through images long before they consciously analyze them. By carefully controlling those images, they transformed a jungle adventure into a visually memorable cinematic journey. The result is a film whose action sequences remain compelling not merely because of what happens, but because of how expertly those events are translated into visual language. Sound is one of cinema's most powerful technologies because audiences often feel its effects before they consciously recognize them. Viewers may notice explosions, helicopters, gunfire, and music, but beneath those obvious elements exists an intricate architecture of audio engineering. In Rambo, First Blood Part 2, sound functions as far more than accompaniment. It shapes tension, directs attention, amplifies emotion, and transforms images into immersive experiences. Without its carefully constructed soundscape, many of the film's most memorable moments would lose a significant portion of their impact. One of the first principles of sound design is that silence can be just as important as noise. Effective audio professionals understand that constant intensity eventually becomes exhausting. The film frequently alternates between quieter moments and explosive action sequences. This contrast creates dynamic range. By reducing auditory stimulation during calmer scenes, the filmmakers increase the perceived power of subsequent action. Dynamic range management is a fundamental concept in audio engineering. It refers to the difference between the quietest and loudest sounds within a recording. Films that maintain meaningful dynamic variation often feel more immersive because they mirror real human experience. Life is not uniformly loud or uniformly quiet. Moments of stillness make moments of chaos more dramatic. The jungle environment provides a rich foundation for environmental sound design. In reality, forests are rarely silent. Wind moves through vegetation. Insects produce continuous background activity. Water flows through rivers and streams. Birds communicate across distances. These ambient sounds create a sense of place. Even when audiences do not consciously focus on them, environmental audio helps convince viewers that characters genuinely inhabit their surroundings. One fascinating aspect of sound design involves selective emphasis. Real environments contain countless noises simultaneously, yet audiences can only process limited information effectively. Sound editors therefore prioritize certain elements, while reducing others. A footstep may become slightly more prominent. A rustling branch may receive subtle enhancement. These decisions guide attention much like cinematography guides the eye. Helicopter sequences demonstrate the complexity of audio layering. What appears to be a single sound often consists of numerous separate recordings. Rotor blades, engine vibrations, wind displacement, environmental reflections, and mechanical components may all be combined into one cohesive auditory experience. Skilled sound designers blend these elements carefully to create realism while maintaining dramatic impact. Action sequences rely heavily upon sound effects because physical impact is often communicated through audio rather than visuals alone. Explosions, gunfire, impacts, and machinery produce emotional responses largely because of their acoustic characteristics. A visually impressive explosion accompanied by weak audio rarely feels convincing. Conversely, powerful sound design can dramatically increase perceived scale and intensity. During the 1980s, sound departments relied upon techniques that were remarkably sophisticated despite technological limitations compared to modern systems. Audio editors worked extensively with analog equipment, physical recordings, and manual synchronization processes. The absence of contemporary digital workflows required exceptional craftsmanship and attention to detail. Dialogue clarity represents another major challenge throughout the film. Jungle environments introduce numerous acoustic complications. Wind interferes with microphones. Wildlife creates background noise. Water generates competing frequencies. Production sound teams and post-production specialists work together to ensure that audiences can understand important conversations without sacrificing environmental authenticity. ADR, or automated dialogue replacement, likely played an important role during post-production. This process allows actors to re-record dialogue in controlled studio environments when original recordings prove difficult to use. Successful ADR is largely invisible because audiences rarely realize that dialogue was recorded separately from the filmed performance. Music provides the emotional framework that connects individual scenes into a coherent experience. The score composed by Jerry Goldsmith performs this function exceptionally well. Rather than merely accompanying events, the music interprets them. It communicates emotional information that visuals alone cannot fully express. Courage, loneliness, determination, loss, and hope all become more accessible through musical storytelling. Goldsmith's work demonstrates a deep understanding of thematic composition. Effective film scores often establish recognizable musical identities associated with characters, emotions, or ideas. These recurring motifs create continuity. Audiences may not consciously identify them, yet repeated exposure strengthens emotional familiarity and narrative cohesion. From a psychological perspective, music functions as an emotional accelerator. A scene viewed without music often feels neutral. The same scene accompanied by carefully selected orchestration may become inspiring, tragic, suspenseful, or triumphant. This influence occurs because music interacts directly with emotional processing systems within the human brain. The film's action sequences benefit enormously from synchronization between music and sound effects. Audio engineers must balance competing priorities. Gunfire must remain impactful. Dialogue must remain intelligible. Music must remain emotionally effective. Environmental sounds must preserve realism. Achieving equilibrium between these elements requires both technical expertise and artistic judgment. Spatial audio perception also contributes significantly to immersion. Even before advanced surround sound technologies became widespread, sound mixers carefully positioned audio elements to create a sense of direction and movement. A helicopter approaching from the distance feels different from one already overhead. A threat emerging from off-screen generates anticipation because audiences hear it before they see it. Sound designers frequently describe their work as invisible storytelling. When audio functions perfectly, viewers rarely notice the individual components. Instead, they experience a seamless world that feels authentic and emotionally coherent. This invisibility represents success rather than failure. The objective is immersion, not attention. Investment in sound often generates exceptional returns because audiences are highly sensitive to audio quality even when they lack technical vocabulary to describe it. Poor sound immediately weakens immersion. Strong sound enhances virtually every aspect of storytelling. In business terms, audio production frequently delivers one of the highest emotional ROIs within filmmaking. Looking back at Rambo, First Blood Part 2, its sound design and musical production reveal an extraordinary level of craftsmanship. Environmental ambience creates realism. Effects generate impact. Dialogue communicates narrative information. Music provides emotional meaning. Together, these elements form a sophisticated audio ecosystem supporting every scene. The result is a film that does not simply show action but allows audiences to feel it. Through careful engineering and artistic insight, the sound team transformed vibrations in the air into tension, excitement, suspense, and inspiration. In many ways, the film's audio architecture serves as an invisible bridge connecting technology and emotion, proving that some of cinema's most powerful storytelling occurs through sounds audiences may never consciously notice. By the time Rambo, First Blood Part 2 entered production, Hollywood was becoming increasingly sophisticated in how it approached audience acquisition. Studios no longer relied solely on trailers and newspaper advertisements. Marketing was evolving into a data-informed discipline where audience psychology, demographic targeting, brand recognition, and release timing could significantly influence financial outcomes. The film provides a fascinating example of how marketing strategy can transform a successful character into a global entertainment franchise. Every marketing campaign begins with a core question: who is the ideal customer? In modern business language, this is known as target audience identification. The filmmakers and distributors understood that Rambo appealed strongly to viewers who enjoyed action, military adventure, survival stories, and heroic narratives. Rather than attempting to attract every possible demographic equally, the campaign focused on audiences most likely to respond enthusiastically. This strategy reflects an important marketing principle. Effective campaigns rarely attempt to appeal to everyone simultaneously. Instead, they identify high-probability consumers and concentrate resources accordingly. By positioning Rambo as the ultimate action hero, the marketing team created a clear and memorable value proposition. Audiences immediately understood what type of experience the film promised. Posters served as one of the most important marketing assets of the era. Unlike today's digital advertising environment, theatrical posters often functioned as primary awareness generators. The imagery used for Rambo emphasized strength, determination, weaponry, and survival. These visual signals communicated genre, tone, and emotional expectations within seconds. Good marketing reduces uncertainty. Potential customers quickly understand what product is being offered. Trailer construction represented another critical component of the campaign. A trailer functions much like a startup pitch deck. It must communicate value quickly while generating curiosity. Reveal too much and audience anticipation declines. Reveal too little and interest fails to develop. The promotional material for the film carefully balanced spectacle and mystery, showcasing action while preserving key narrative developments. From a behavioral psychology perspective, the campaign relied heavily on anticipation. Human beings are naturally drawn toward incomplete information. When audiences glimpse exciting moments without understanding their full context, curiosity increases. This phenomenon encourages future engagement because viewers seek resolution. Marketing departments frequently leverage this psychological tendency when designing promotional materials. Star power significantly amplified campaign effectiveness. Sylvester Stallone was already a globally recognizable figure by the mid-1980s. In marketing terms, he functioned as an established brand. Consumers had prior experiences with his work and associated him with specific emotional outcomes. This familiarity reduced consumer hesitation and increased confidence in the purchasing decision. Modern marketers often discuss customer acquisition costs. Although the terminology differed during the 1980s, the underlying concept remained similar. Every advertisement, promotional appearance, trailer placement, and media campaign represented an investment intended to generate ticket sales. Successful marketing increases awareness efficiently enough that revenue growth exceeds promotional expenditures. International marketing strategy deserves particular attention. Action films often perform exceptionally well across global markets because they depend heavily on visual storytelling. Themes such as courage, perseverance, danger, and survival possess near-universal appeal. Distributors recognized that Rambo's image could communicate effectively even in regions where language and cultural differences might otherwise complicate promotion. If contemporary audience analytics had existed in their modern form, the film likely would have generated fascinating data profiles. Today, studios examine metrics such as audience retention, engagement rates, geographic performance, demographic segmentation, sentiment analysis, and social media interactions. While such tools were unavailable at the time, studios still relied on box office tracking, market research, audience surveys, and test screenings to evaluate performance. Test screenings function as early versions of modern A/B testing. Different audiences view preliminary cuts, providing feedback regarding pacing, character engagement, emotional impact, and narrative clarity. Filmmakers can then adjust elements before wide release. This process resembles technology companies testing product features before full-scale deployment. The concept of brand positioning also played a major role in the film's success. The campaign did not present Rambo merely as a veteran. It presented him as an icon. This distinction is important because icons possess greater long-term commercial value than individual stories. A successful icon can support sequels, merchandise, licensing agreements, and broader franchise development. Word-of-mouth marketing likely became one of the most powerful growth drivers after release. Even before the internet era, audiences shared recommendations through personal conversations, workplaces, schools, and social networks. Positive word-of-mouth functions as extraordinarily efficient advertising because consumers often trust peers more than promotional materials. Strong audience reactions therefore become self-reinforcing growth mechanisms. Audience segmentation also helps explain the film's broad appeal. Different viewers could engage with the movie for different reasons. Some sought action and excitement. Others appreciated survival themes. Some connected with the veteran experience. Others simply wanted spectacle. Effective entertainment products often succeed because they deliver multiple forms of value simultaneously. If analyzed through a modern CPM framework, the film would likely attract advertisers associated with entertainment, consumer products, fitness, outdoor equipment, gaming, and military history interests. However, the deeper themes involving psychology, resilience, leadership, and institutional decision-making would also create opportunities for educational and documentary-oriented audiences. The movie's marketing effectiveness demonstrates an important lesson in audience analytics. Consumers frequently purchase emotions rather than products. People were not merely buying tickets to watch explosions. They were purchasing excitement, inspiration, empowerment, and adventure. Successful campaigns understand this distinction and focus promotional messaging on emotional outcomes rather than technical features. The longevity of the Rambo brand further validates the campaign's success. Effective marketing creates awareness. Exceptional marketing creates memory. Decades after release, the image of Rambo remains instantly recognizable across multiple generations. Such durability represents one of the highest forms of brand equity because recognition continues producing commercial value long after initial promotional spending has ended. Looking back, Rambo: First Blood Part 2 serves as an excellent case study in audience acquisition, brand management, and entertainment marketing. Its promotional strategy combined star power, visual clarity, emotional positioning, international scalability, and strong audience targeting. Long before modern social media analytics, algorithmic advertising, and digital A/B testing became common, the film demonstrated many of the principles that continue to drive successful campaigns today. It understood its audience, communicated its value proposition clearly, and transformed a popular character into a global franchise asset. From a marketing perspective, that achievement may be almost as impressive as anything Rambo accomplishes on screen. By the standards of critics, audiences, and the entertainment industry, Rambo: First Blood Part 2 became one of the most consequential action films of the 1980s. Yet the journey from release to legacy was not entirely straightforward. Critical reception, commercial reception, and long-term cultural influence often follow different paths. Some films receive immediate praise but fade from memory. Others face mixed reviews yet become cultural landmarks. The story of Rambo: First Blood Part 2 belongs firmly to the second category. Upon release, critical reactions were divided. Many reviewers praised the film's energy, pacing, action choreography, and commercial appeal. Others criticized what they viewed as simplified politics, exaggerated action, or broad storytelling. This split illustrates an important reality within entertainment economics. Critical acclaim and audience enthusiasm do not always move together. They are separate forms of value operating within different evaluation systems. Critics often assess originality, thematic complexity, artistic innovation, and narrative sophistication. General audiences frequently prioritize emotional satisfaction, entertainment value, excitement, and memorable experiences. Neither perspective is inherently correct or incorrect. They simply reflect different objectives. Rambo: First Blood Part 2 connected strongly with mass audiences even when certain critics remained skeptical. From a business standpoint, audience response ultimately became the dominant variable. Box office performance demonstrated extraordinary consumer demand. The film's global theatrical revenue significantly exceeded production costs and established the franchise as one of Hollywood's most valuable action properties. Investors care deeply about critical perception, but sustained audience engagement remains the most important indicator of commercial viability. One fascinating aspect of film reception involves expectation management. Sequels frequently face unique challenges because audiences arrive with pre-existing assumptions. They compare new experiences against earlier installments rather than evaluating them independently. Rambo: First Blood Part 2 succeeded largely because it expanded the scale of the franchise while preserving the core identity of its protagonist. Viewers felt they were receiving more of what they valued rather than something entirely different. Awards recognition presents another interesting lens through which to examine reception. Prestigious industry awards often favor dramas, historical narratives, and character-driven productions. Action films have historically faced greater difficulty securing major awards recognition despite achieving enormous cultural impact. This dynamic highlights the difference between institutional prestige and popular influence. Cultural capital, however, extends far beyond trophies. A film's true legacy is often determined by its ability to remain relevant in public consciousness. Decades after release, the image of Rambo remains instantly recognizable across generations. Few action characters achieve this level of cultural penetration. The character transcended individual films and became a symbol understood even by people who have never watched the movies themselves. From a branding perspective, this represents extraordinary success. Businesses spend billions attempting to create recognizable intellectual property. Most products disappear quickly after launch. very few achieve lasting symbolic value. Rambo evolved from a fictional character into a global cultural reference point. That transformation dramatically increased the long-term value of the franchise. Home entertainment further strengthened the film's legacy. During the VHS era, successful theatrical releases often gained second lives through home viewing. Families rented movies repeatedly. Fans purchased personal copies. Rewatchability became an increasingly important economic factor. Rambo: First Blood Part 2 proved particularly well-suited for this environment because its action-driven structure encouraged repeat viewing. Television licensing created another layer of long-term monetization. Networks continuously seek recognizable content capable of attracting audiences. Well-known action films often perform strongly because they possess broad demographic appeal and clear marketing value. Every television broadcast effectively extended the movie's lifespan while generating additional revenue streams. Merchandise and licensing opportunities further increased franchise valuation. Action heroes frequently translate effectively into products because they possess distinctive visual identities. Posters, collectibles, apparel, games, and promotional partnerships all contribute incremental value. While individual licensing agreements may appear modest compared to theatrical revenue, collectively they can become substantial sources of long-term earnings. Legacy also depends heavily on influence. One of the clearest indicators of a film's significance is how often future creators borrow from it. The success of Rambo: First Blood Part 2 helped shape action cinema throughout the late 1980s and beyond. Numerous films adopted similar visual styles, character archetypes, narrative structures, and marketing approaches. Influence functions almost like intellectual inheritance. Ideas continued generating value long after their original creation. The film's portrayal of the lone action hero became particularly influential. Future protagonists across countless franchises echoed elements of the Rambo formula. Highly capable individuals confronting overwhelming opposition became one of the defining structures of modern action storytelling. Whether consciously or unconsciously, many filmmakers drew inspiration from the blueprint established here. From an educational perspective, the movie also serves as an interesting case study in audience psychology. It demonstrates how entertainment can transform complex historical emotions into accessible narratives. Regardless of one's views on its themes, the film provides valuable insight into how societies process memory, identity, and cultural uncertainty through storytelling. Streaming platforms have introduced additional dimensions to legacy valuation. In the modern media environment, recognizable franchises possess enormous advantages. Audiences confronted with thousands of viewing options frequently gravitate toward familiar brands. Intellectual property that remains recognizable across decades retains significant economic utility. Rambo continues benefiting from this phenomenon. If we were to estimate the lifetime economic value generated by the film and its associated franchise effects, the total would extend far beyond original theatrical revenue. Home entertainment, television rights, streaming agreements, licensing arrangements, merchandise, international distribution, and franchise expansion all contribute to cumulative value creation. The original production budget appears increasingly modest when viewed against these long-term returns. Cultural legacy is often difficult to measure because it operates beyond traditional financial metrics. Yet some indicators remain clear. People remember the character. They remember the imagery. They remember the emotional experience. Memory itself becomes a form of value. Films capable of remaining present within public consciousness possess advantages unavailable to projects that fade quickly from attention. Looking back today, Rambo: First Blood Part 2 occupies a fascinating position within cinematic history. It may not have achieved universal critical acclaim, but it achieved something arguably more difficult: enduring relevance. Its commercial success validated the franchise. Its cultural influence shaped action filmmaking. Its branding power transformed a character into a global icon. Decades later, the film continues generating discussion, revenue, recognition, and influence. In valuation terms, this represents exceptional performance. The movie's legacy proves that cultural capital and financial capital often reinforce one another. A film remembered for generations becomes more than entertainment. It becomes an enduring asset whose impact extends far beyond its original release window. Great action films often leave behind more than memorable scenes. They leave behind questions. Questions about courage, responsibility, leadership, loyalty, and the price people pay when institutions fail them. By the end of Rambo, First Blood Part 2, the explosions have faded, the battles have ended, and the mission itself has been completed. What remains is an opportunity to reflect on why this story resonated so strongly with audiences around the world and why it continues to occupy a meaningful place within action cinema history. On the surface, the film appears to tell a simple story. A highly skilled veteran returns to a hostile environment to confront unfinished business. Yet beneath that straightforward structure lies a much larger examination of human purpose. Rambo is not motivated primarily by money, recognition, or personal advancement. He is motivated by responsibility. Throughout the film, responsibility repeatedly outweighs convenience. This principle forms the moral foundation upon which the entire narrative rests. From a psychological perspective, the movie explores what happens when an individual loses faith in institutions but continues believing in people. This distinction is important. Cynicism toward systems does not necessarily require cynicism toward humanity. Rambo frequently distrusts organizations, yet he remains committed to protecting individuals. That commitment becomes the source of his resilience. It gives direction to his actions when external guidance becomes unreliable. The film also demonstrates how purpose can function as a form of psychological fuel. Human beings are capable of extraordinary endurance when they believe their efforts possess meaning. Throughout history, explorers, scientists, entrepreneurs, soldiers, and innovators have often persevered through immense hardship because they felt connected to something larger than themselves. The movie repeatedly returns to this idea. Physical strength matters, but purpose often matters more. Looking at the film through an economic lens reveals equally fascinating insights. What began as a roughly $25 million production evolved into a global entertainment phenomenon generating hundreds of millions in revenue. This transformation illustrates one of the most remarkable characteristics of the creative industries. Ideas can scale. Stories can scale. Characters can scale. Unlike physical products constrained by manufacturing limitations, intellectual property can continue creating value long after production concludes. The Rambo franchise serves as a powerful example of brand creation. Businesses frequently spend enormous resources attempting to establish recognizable identities. The film industry pursues the same objective. Successful characters become assets capable of generating revenue across multiple decades and platforms. The financial success of the movie was not merely a victory for one production. It strengthened an entire franchise ecosystem. Technology also played a crucial role in that achievement. Every helicopter sequence, practical explosion, camera setup, lighting arrangement, and editing decision contributed to the audience experience. Yet the film offers an important lesson regarding innovation. Technology succeeds most effectively when it supports emotion. Viewers rarely leave a theater discussing lens specifications or recording equipment. They remember how the story made them feel. The technical systems work best when they become invisible. This relationship between technology and emotion mirrors developments across many industries. The most successful products often hide their complexity. Smartphones conceal enormous engineering sophistication beneath intuitive interfaces. Automobiles transform intricate mechanical systems into effortless transportation. Cinema operates similarly. Countless technical decisions combine to create experiences that feel natural and emotionally immediate. The production itself demonstrates the power of coordinated human effort. Hundreds of professionals contributed specialized expertise. Producers managed budgets. Directors shaped creative vision. Cinematographers translated ideas into images. Editors transformed footage into narrative rhythm. Sound designers built immersive environments. Stunt teams executed dangerous sequences safely. No single individual could have accomplished the task alone. In this sense, the film becomes an illustration of organizational excellence. Success emerged not from isolated talent but from collaboration. different disciplines aligned around a common objective. This principle applies equally to filmmaking, business, education, engineering, and scientific research. Extraordinary outcomes often emerge when diverse forms of expertise converge effectively. The movie's enduring popularity also reveals important truths about audience psychology. People consistently respond to stories involving perseverance, sacrifice, redemption, and loyalty. Technologies evolve. Markets change. Distribution platforms transform. Yet certain emotional themes remain remarkably stable across generations. The film taps into these universal themes with considerable effectiveness, which helps explain its longevity. Historically, the movie captures a particular cultural moment while simultaneously transcending it. Although rooted in specific concerns associated with the post-Vietnam era, its broader themes remain accessible. Questions about duty, trust, leadership, and responsibility continue to resonate because they are fundamentally human questions rather than purely historical ones. From an educational standpoint, the film provides a fascinating case study in the intersection of art, psychology, technology, and capital. The story itself explores moral conviction. The production demonstrates technical craftsmanship. The business performance illustrates financial scalability. Together, these dimensions reveal why cinema remains such a uniquely powerful medium. Few industries combine creative expression, technological innovation, and economic ambition so completely. Looking back across all 13 stages of this analysis, we can see that Rambo, First Blood Part 2 operates on multiple levels simultaneously. It functions as action entertainment. It functions as psychological exploration. It functions as a production management achievement. It functions as a technological artifact of 1980s filmmaking. It functions as a successful commercial enterprise. Each perspective reveals new layers of understanding. Perhaps the most valuable lesson comes from the relationship between conviction and action. Throughout the film, progress occurs when individuals accept responsibility rather than waiting for ideal circumstances. Whether audiences interpret that message personally, professionally, or philosophically, it remains one of the story's most enduring ideas. Meaning is rarely discovered through passivity. More often, it emerges through commitment. The movie's financial success, cultural influence, and lasting recognition ultimately stem from this alignment of themes and execution. Creative ambition, technical expertise, production discipline, marketing intelligence, and audience psychology all worked together toward a common outcome. The result was not merely a profitable film, but a lasting piece of popular culture that continues attracting viewers decades after its release. In the end, Rambo, First Blood Part 2 reminds us that cinema is one of humanity's most fascinating inventions. It transforms capital into stories, technology into emotion, and imagination into shared experience. A camera records images. Editors shape time. Musicians shape feeling. Audiences supply meaning. When these elements align successfully, films become more than entertainment. They become cultural memories carried across generations. If you found this deep dive meaningful, my literature-loving friends, consider liking and subscribing so we can keep decoding the business and beauty of cinema together.